What makes most women start a business? Is it passion, money, or freedom? Welcome to the Female Founders, the podcast that takes you behind the scene with women who are founders and CEOs to help you start and scale a successful business of your own. I am your host, Nagilia de Ravin. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Female Founders. Today's conversation will be with Dr. Rosie Ward. She is the founder and CEO of Salveo Partners. Dr. Rosie is a passionate leader, coach, and speaker who helps organizations create healthier workplaces. Hi, Dr. Rosie. I am so excited to have this conversation with you, and I hope that you are okay if I call you Dr. Rosie instead.
No, yeah, you can call me Rosie. Like, that's great. I'm so excited to be here. So thank you.
But what inspired you to start your own company, and what was the turning point where it led you to workplace? Why that?
You know, I had two experiences in my life where I firsthand was in a toxic work environment. And the first was I was fresh out of my master's degree, and I experienced everything that I had read about in books, but never had seen personally, where it was poor leadership, poor morale, people watching the clock. And me being an overachiever at the time and taking pride in my work, I saw that within just 4 months of being in that environment, I gained 10 to 15 pounds. I started getting sick a lot. I started to become like, I'm watching the clock. You're not going to get one more thing out of me. And it was like someone swallowed me and I wasn't me. And I remember the kicker was my friends at the time, God love them, said to me, Rosie, what is wrong with you? You don't seem like you. And that was my kind of impetus of, gosh, I got to look at this differently. And so I went back to school to get my PhD in organization and management to go, I got to look at this different from a culture lens, et cetera. And then my second experience in a toxic work environment was years later. And I was working at a consulting firm. And what brought me there in the first place was their culture was great. And they had won all these awards and they very much had that entrepreneurial spirit, and they prided themselves in being different players in their industry. And it was challenging the status quo was a good thing. And then, like what happens with a lot of organizations, the owner's retirement strategy was to sell to a larger firm. And it became the go into a box, and they wanted to put me in a box, which is not good. And it was every little thing not okay anymore. Now suddenly sticking out and speaking up was a liability. And it became a bad game of chicken with me and my boss of like, was I going to get fired before I could find another job? I was actually on a performance improvement plan, the only one in my life, because I brought them too much Rosie related money. Figure that one out. I'm not really, I was like, your sales, like, because it was like the different, and I was like, you're mad. Riddle me this, Batman. You're mad at me for bringing you in too much of my related money because your salespeople can't close the deal, whatever, right? So that was like, I just was like, nobody should have to go through this. And then at the time, I was now a mom with a kid with a lot of health issues, and I was like, it had a ripple effect. And I just thought, by the time he gets into the workforce, God, this should not be the norm. We should not have movies like Horrible Bosses 1 and 2. We should not have TV shows like The Office because they're not funny because no one can relate. And I just was like, there's got to be a better way. And so I had to write out a non-compete, but I was like, here we go. We're just going to help solve this and really look at how do we rehumanize workplaces and ultimately future-proof leaders and teams to better navigate change and disruption. And so we've kind of morphed and evolved, but we're Salveo Partners is my company. And this October will be our 10th year. And which feels like amazing, but it's just like work shouldn't have to be that painful. Work shouldn't have to be that hard. And you shouldn't have to check your humanity and your authentic self and dim your sparkle, and have your light go out whether you're physically going into an office or not. It's just like, that's just stupid. So there we go.
But does the company works with individuals, or they work with other organizations to provide the service?
Yeah, so we primarily work with other organizations, and they will. So we kind of have three buckets of services. We have our people-centric culture transformation services. So we do a lot of things around helping clarify purpose and values and helping to align systems where it's a lived experience, not just words on a website or not just like a bumper sticker. We have developing future-ready leaders. So we really focus on how do we upskill formal and informal leaders to navigate this environment, and how do we help them become a better version of themselves. And a lot of the human interpersonal skills that are needed now more than ever in a world of AI. That's what we upskill leaders and teams to have tools and language to do that. And then we also do a lot of facilitation, speaking, et cetera. That being said, we do periodically have someone who will reach out and say, hey, I on my own or my organization is going to support it. I'm looking for a coach. Will you, can we reach out to? So we do have that some. And we also do have one public facing program that consumers can sign up for that's called our Courageous Leadership Program. To kind of get a taste and give them tools, because we know not everybody has an organization that has a robust development budget. So we do have a few things that any consumer can, reach out to or sign up for. The majority of our work is B2B. Yeah.
B2B. And then also when you go to the organizations, is it like a long term or is it like a short term kind of stay?
It varies. So our favorite clients are the ones that view us as a long-term partner. And so, year over year, we look at what's the scope for 2025, and we divide it up amongst 12 months and go, okay, here we go. And we're going to do all these different things because we can really get in depth and really help them, because culture and leadership is an ongoing long-term journey.
Yes.
But we do also, though, have clients, and most of our long-term clients started out with, you know what? We just have one or two leaders who we want to level up or who might be struggling either way. We're going to hire you and kind of test the waters. We might want our executive team or any kind of leadership team for that matter to be more cohesive. We maybe just want to have some meaningful team alignment. I don't like token team building, doesn't work, but we want some meaningful tools to help our teams get on the same page and, enhance psychological safety, enhance performance, those types of things. So we might get hired on just a project basis. And then obviously I do a lot of keynote speaking, getting hired for speaking gigs. Hey, can you come facilitate a retreat? Can you come facilitate a listening session? So we do a lot of transformational facilitation, kind of one-off work too. So kind of everything from that one-off to mid-range to long-term, multi-year, year over year. It really just depends on where an organization or an individual is, really.
But do you also like managers? Or is it more like into the CEOs and then the CFOs, COO?
It's all of the above, quite frankly. And the reason, so we look at leadership itself. Leadership, let's be honest, it is not about a title or a role, and it never has been. So, I mean, if our world right now has shown us anything, it is not about a title or a role. So we really believe that in this disruptive environment, we need to equip everyone to show up as a leader. So that they're maximizing their positive impact and they're getting out of their own way. That being said, if somebody has a formal leadership role, they are a supervisor or manager or VP or C-suite, whatever that title is in an organization, they do need an additional level of intention because of the influence they have over culture and the employee experience. And so I coach CEOs. We work with executive teams to help do group facilitation and group-based work to help them with strategic clarity, to help them with team cohesion, to help them show up more courageously, those types of things. We also work with frontline managers who really, that's where stuff falls apart. So you could have an amazing C-suite, and then you have these frontline managers who do not know how to almost do kind of management 101, and they're falling on old school leadership practices. Not even leadership, they're old school management practices that are so outdated. And so how do we really help them lead in a different world? Gen Zs in the workplace have very different needs than Gen Xers and baby boomers.
That's
and so
true.
How do we really help people care for the messy humanness that inevitably comes into workplaces that once upon a time was thought there was a hard line between work and people bring their whole humanness into work. They bring emotions, they bring worries, they bring fears. And if we don't spend time caring for that and finding a way forward, there's a whole bunch of unnecessary suffering that happens.
But what do you think that, what do you believe set your company apart from others in the consultant space?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think what fundamentally differentiates us is, yes, there's a lot of amazing leadership development and culture consulting firms, but we actually just wrapped up a really pretty phenomenal research study looking at hundreds of leaders across industries over the last several years, because we started to see patterns. And leaders, and anybody, anybody can be a leader, but fundamentally get in their own way, because we are being kind of by default operating off of what we've identified as our 7 faulty programs. So we have this like, just like you have a computer, right, that has an operating system, or like your phone has an operating system, our brains in the early years of our life are downloading our programming from our lived experiences. And we're talking in the first 10 or so years of our life. And here's why this is important. So bear with me for a second, is that those programs that we download are hardwired for survival. So they tell us when to speak up, when to be quiet, when we're going to be accepted, when we're going to be rejected. It's about feeling in control, feeling acceptance, feeling belonging. The problem with that is that studies have shown that 70% of that programming that we download is fundamentally flawed, negative, and self-sabotaging. And you add on top of that as a species, we are on autopilot, run off of that faulty programming about 95% of the time as our subconscious is taking over. So the way I put it quite simply is it's like you have a bunch of insecure, scared 10-year-olds running around trying to navigate organizations, complex situations, but they don't realize it. So you see a lot of behaviors and we start judging one another and we start pointing fingers and we start the blame game. And the reality is the only way that we're going to be future ready and the only way that we're going to reconcile the gap of what our disruptive world demands of us and our biological wiring for self-protection and clinging tightly to what is familiar is we basically have to go through an upgrade process. And so we've identified these 7 faulty programs that are the most common that everybody has. And most people have more than one of these. And then once we identify those faulty programs, we methodically bring them through the upgrade process. And I'm going to tell you, there's stuff you can do right away to start the upgrade process. But the reality is it's not like an hour-long upgrade. It takes a good 6 to 8 months. This is not, and so people don't want to tend to lean in, or organizations will be like, oh, we just want to send them to a LinkedIn learning module. Well, that's not how we develop and that's not how we upgrade. And so what makes us different is that we get to the core of what is challenging, and most change efforts at organizational level fail because they're not caring for the messy elements of being human. So we care for the messy elements of being human. We normalize it and give people common language to say, this is why you're experiencing the challenges you are. Welcome to being human. You're normal. So they get out of shame. And now we're going to help you identify where you get stuck, and we're going to help upgrade that. And then once we upgrade that programming, then we can start to hone your skills on fill in the blank. So let me give you an example. So I was working with a leadership team recently, and we had a group that, so one of the faulty programs is called the martyr. And people who have this martyr programming tend to fundamentally put themselves last, feel like their needs don't matter. They have a hard time setting boundaries. They're not going to speak up if they think that, it's going to be somehow have them be selfish, whatever. So many people who have the martyr program actually have goals where they want to get better at boundaries. They want to get better at managing their time and prioritizing their schedule and working on the business versus in the business. We've done that correlation. So I looked at this group of people running the martyr program, and I said, so let me guess, most of you struggle with your calendar. Most of you, if you have time blocked to reflect or to work on something, you accept meeting invites and work over that. And they're just nodding their head. They're like, how do you know me? I'm like, because this is what this program does to you. Now, let me guess, your organization will go, here, take a productivity class. Here's a tip sheet on, how to optimize Microsoft Outlook. And they wonder why it doesn't work. It's not going to work if someone's running the martyr program. They have to upgrade that programming of why it's so hard for them before any of those productivity tools are going to work. Or I looked over at another group that had the people pleaser program. People pleasers fundamentally fear rejection at a really high level. So they're not going to speak up and do things where they might potentially be outcast or piss somebody off or let somebody down. So I looked at this group of leaders and I said, let me guess, despite probably a gajillion trainings you've been put through, you still struggle with growth, feedback, conversations, and accountability, don't you? Again, they looked at me and said, how do you know this? I'm like, because we've done the analysis, and most people who have people pleaser programs are trying to get better at that and they don't know why they can't. And so I said, but guess what? If we upgraded that programming for you, now all of that training that you've taken previously, it would actually start to kick in. You'd actually start to use it. And they're like, and everyone's like, I feel so seen. So that's just a microcosm example, but we get to all of this other stuff and you wonder why it doesn't work, or you have to keep repeating trainings because we're looking for an easy button that doesn't exist. And so we really get at that fundamental human level. And then on teams and organizations, we don't just do that upgrade. We then give them common tools and language that they can lean on to reinforce to kind of get back in check when their humanity gets the best of them, or when that upgrade suddenly hit a factory reset and we have to upgrade it again. So I don't know if that helps, but that's kind of that's the way that we look at it, and why like so many of our clients are seeing business results and they're seeing the record growth and share prices and stuff. When they get really intentional about their culture and their leadership, these other results start to happen. And it seems like it's counterintuitive, but it's like, no, like it makes a huge difference.
Well, listening to you talking about the programs, it sounds like there's a bit of psychology behind them. Because I study psychology, that's something that I'm very passionate about. I like to learn the human, the way we function, the things we do, and why we do them. So the way you kind of put it together, it's like you put a little bit of psychology into it to kind of have an understanding of what's going on within the human mind itself.
Yeah, I mean, everything that we do is rooted in science of human behavior, psychology, neuroscience, because there's the combination of there's the psychological level, there's also the neurological level of how our brains are hardwired and some of that, and they go kind of hand in hand. I'm not a psychologist by training, but a lot of the stuff that we do is rooted in theories that come from adult development, theories that come from psychology. There's a little bit of synergy with some practices that might be like cognitive behavioral therapy, some of those types of things. So there's some foundations in those theories and in what we know about what it means to be human, for sure. Yeah.
In your work, you talk about leaders showing up courageously. What does that look like in practice, and how can leaders develop this skill?
I love this question. And I think one of the things that I will just preface this with is why we think it's so critical for leaders to show up courageously is not just, oh, you need to. It's rooted in the data. So Dr. Brene Brown and colleagues are now well over 12 years into research on leadership. And globally, they have asked C-suite leaders what needs to change for them to be effective in this complex and rapidly changing environment. And what they've learned from asking this question is that what the future basically demands is that we have braver leaders and courageous cultures. And so what that means to show up as a braver or a courageous leader and to create cultures that are also courageous is that we are leaning into vulnerability, but vulnerability is not falling apart and oversharing. Vulnerability is leaning into uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. Vulnerability is meaning that, guess what? I am leaning in and staying curious and present in a conversation rather than tapping out with defensiveness, doubling down on my judgments, doubling down on self-righteousness. It means that I'm not tapping out of difficult conversations by either withdrawing or taking over. It means that I am staying in the discomfort of problem identification rather than short-circuiting that with action bias. It means that I'm admitting when I don't know the answer and I'm not trying to be the smartest person in the room. It means that I'm okay with asking good questions that I have no idea what the answer is going to be, and it might be unsettling, but it's the right thing to do. That's what we mean by courageous leadership, is that we are showing up fully authentically human. We aren't trying to put on masks or armor to hide our flaws and inadequacies. We're connecting on a human level. We are staying grounded and anchored in our values and our purpose, and we're not tapping out when things get cringy. Yeah. That's really fundamentally what it means to show up courageously. And quite frankly, if more of us did that, rather than, there's so many different ways we tap out when things get cringy, but it leads to disconnection and defensiveness, when what we need more of right now is leaning in, connection, curiosity. Man, we need a lot more of that in our world. And so that's really what courageous leadership at its highest level is fundamentally all about.
But you have written books on workplace culture and leadership, which I understand why, since that's your thing.
Yeah.
What key message do you hope readers to take away from your work?
That's a great question. I'm actually in the middle of writing our third book based on these faulty programs on future-proofing leadership that'll be out next spring. I think the biggest thing that we say with all of our work is that here's the deal. You're dealing with human beings. You're not dealing with predictable, controllable machines or small children or, yes, lab rats. Human beings are messy. Human beings are emotional creatures. And we have to understand that, and understand that when you're faced with challenges of why aren't people getting behind this change or this new process, why are people not getting along, whatever it might be, it's their humanness getting in their way. It's basically their like kind of 10-year-old self. And so the first thing that I always like to say is if we just recognize for a second that a lot of these behaviors, like I don't think most people get up in the morning. There might be a few, but I don't think most people get up in the morning and say, I'm going to be a butthead today. Right. Like we don't. But here's the thing is that, again, it's that subconscious programming that is running us 95% of the time that is mostly flawed. So just keep that in mind. So something happens in our environment. Someone says something, we get an email, and it triggers and activates that. Yes. I'm just going to say that 10-year-old self. It could be 5, it could be 15, but like 10's a nice round number. And then we lash out, we shut down, we make meaning, we create a narrative that isn't true. And so the biggest thing that I try to tell people is this. So one, it is that as human beings, we create stories to make sense of our experiences. It's how we're designed as a species. But most of those stories are full of crap and full of head trash. Yeah. And so because those stories are doing their job to keep us safe. So the question that we need to start asking ourselves day in and day out, especially if we know it's like this emotionally hijacked type of story, is this story actually true today? Maybe it was true when you were 5, but it's like, is it actually true today? Like, am I going to not survive if that person doesn't like me? Like, I'm not in the schoolyard anymore. Who the hell cares? But we go into this mode. So is it actually true today? And is holding on to it serving me and others well? Or is it preventing me from having the impact I want to have? So we start to kind of fact check the fact that I'm telling myself a story, this isn't fact. And is this a story that I want to run with, or is this a story that I want to rewrite? So that is the first thing, because also in the absence of data, our brain's filled in with story. So we've just got to own that we tell a whole lot of stories and we've got to fact check it. The second thing is recognizing that for the most part, there's a lot of 10-year-olds running around, and think about put yourself back at your 10-year-old self. And what does your 10-year-old self need to hear? Mine at the time, when I look back and look at my faulty programming, what she needed to hear is you don't have to be perfect, that you are enough just as you are, that you are loved, and your worth isn't dependent on what you get done or how much you accomplish. And then think about, what is your neighbor, your colleague, your boss's 10-year-old self likely need to hear? And in that moment when we're judging people, can we instead lean into curiosity and maybe a little bit of empathy? It's not about excusing poor behavior, but have a little empathy of, God, I wonder what faulty programming might be hijacking them. And can we start to treat each other as kind of, flawed human beings, and give ourselves and others some grace, but also set some boundaries and be like, this isn't okay. And I get that your 10-year-old self is lashing out, but you don't get to talk to me that way, type of thing. So I think if we can start just doing those simple things, which are easier said than done, we would move from reactivity that rarely serves anybody well to more intentionality, more courage, more effectiveness, and really greater impact.
And also, you have a podcast, Show Up as a Leader.
Yeah.
I love the name because it's kind of like, it talks for itself. Show up as a leader.
Yeah.
I think it's just, this is what it is. It help you show up as a leader. So you reach people across the world.
Yeah.
What are some of the most powerful conversation or lesson you have shared?
There are so many. We're in the 5th year of the show. And I think what I love about all of the conversations is, first of all, you see people's humanity, that even the most successful people, however you define that, or outwardly successful, are human beings who tell themselves stories. Because I ask every guest to share their self-limiting story, and you see it's not just you, they do it too. So for me, it's just been affirming, and that actually fed into we added some of that data into our research. But I think some of the other just amazing stories is just things like, yes, this is what it means to be human. And here's what you do to move beyond it. Here's what you can do at your team. If you're not a formal leader, here's something you still can do to show up as a leader in your life, as a parent, in your community, in your family. If you are a formal leader, here's things that you can start doing to make your workplace irresistible. And what I love about all the conversations is they cross the spectrum of, however you define yourself as a leader. And in each conversation, there's something you can take away from it personally to be a better leader in your life in all facets. And there's something that you can take away that you could either try to influence on your team or in your organization, or that you could apply. So there's always kind of two lenses. And I just think that, I've taken copious notes. I have Post-it notes on my computer from things guests have said. I'm like, oh, I like that one. I'm keeping that one. And we've adopted it in our organization. So I'm just eternally grateful. Like, I've met some amazing people. And the difference it's made for me and our team and our organization is just really cool.
But another thing that even for me, for when I used to work for other organizations, is that they struggle with change. And I think that the world seen it during COVID, because a big change had to be made so fast. A lot of organizations they were not ready for that. So, what advice would you what advice do you have for leaders trying to navigate uncertain times while keeping their teams engaged?
Yeah. I get this question all the time. And here's what I will say. Bear with me for like 30 seconds, but you have to understand what kind of change we're facing. And here's what I mean by that is that there are basically two buckets of changes that we face individually and collectively. There's a type of challenge or type of change that is called a technical change. And that is where there is a straightforward known solution. You can use your existing thinking, knowledge, and skills to solve it. So if you could use checklists and standard operating procedures. If you've done this before, you could extrapolate it from one situation to another, or you could really easily obtain the knowledge and skills. So let's say you want to get better at PowerPoint. There's pretty straightforward, like probably YouTube videos or modules about here's tips and tricks of, how to do all these functionality in PowerPoint. Yes. Or you could delegate it to someone, or you could hire someone. Like, boom, problem solved. Done. Moving on, right? When you are dealing with a technical change, what you need to move through that change is simply information, good, solid information, and you're good. On the other hand, there's this other type of change that is called adaptive. And in adaptive change, there isn't a known solution. And the problem with it is that it bumps us up against that faulty programming because we actually have to let go of what is familiar and what is comfortable. And we don't like that. We are hardwired to avoid discomfort. And so you end up with a whole lot of emotions and whatnot. And so the only way that we can move through adaptive change, it requires transformation. So go back to my people pleaser analogy earlier. If I was going to come into an organization and do a workshop on how to have courageous conversations, and for that group, it was a technical change. All they needed was really good information. So conversation checklist, conversation starters, here's how to structure it. They had that information, they would be off and running and having those courageous conversations and be fine. Yeah. But if in spite of having that information, the thought of wanting to use it makes them want to throw up in the garbage can, they're not going to use that information because it's an adaptive change for them. So we have to address what makes it cringy, what makes it uncomfortable, and kind of go through that transformation process before that information is going to be used, going to stick. And when you talk about since COVID, the reality is like COVID was a huge adaptive change. None of us had been through a pandemic before. And so if you think about since COVID, it has been one adaptive change or one adaptive challenge after the next. And the reality is that in an organization, if you think about it, most of the changes that we are asking people to move through have a little bit of both aspects. There's some technical pieces where skills and knowledge will be helpful, but the overwhelming majority requires transformation. You are asking people to let go of what's comfortable. You are asking people to let go of maybe where they know they think they add value. You are asking people to lean into maybe difficult conversations. You are asking people to get deeply uncomfortable. And then that's where all this messy lack of alignment shows up. And so from a leadership standpoint, we have to be able to be adaptive leaders. We have to be able to do our own work to transform so that we can lean into discomfort. And also, how do you hold a space for others to lean into their own discomfort? Basically, how do you create those courageous cultures? And that is the biggest thing, is that what we, there's a great quote that says the biggest failure of leadership is treating adaptive challenges like they're technical problems, because we want an easy button. And so when we care for that messy human element, when we recognize that transformation is what is needed more than information, then we're going to be more effective. But we usually are trying to use a mismatched solution. And that's why change is really hard.
And a lot of people, like you said, they don't like changes. And that's because they're comfortable, right?
Yep.
So if you have, let's say, for example, you have a husband that's go to work every day, come home and put his 2 feet up and drink beer and say, honey, where's my dinner? So he probably do not want to change it. He doesn't want to change anything, right? Because he's comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
One, he goes to work, he get the paycheck. Two, he come home and he enjoy his beer while watching TV, and then the wife is making the dinner. He's comfortable. And I think that's one thing I always tell people, don't get so comfortable, because you're not supposed to get comfortable in life. Life was not created for that. It's challenges. You're supposed, put yourself, you're in a video game and you have to face all these challenges and you need to get through them. That's the real life. It doesn't matter how you looked at it, right? For some people, just getting outside is a challenge for them. For you, that might be like, that's fun. I just want to go every day for a run outside. If I don't go, it's a problem for me. But for some, going outside, it's scary, because for them, it's like, this is the biggest challenge. They're comfortable at home where they know nothing going to happen to them, right?
Yeah.
But
that's not where growth happens. The old saying that growth doesn't happen inside your comfort zone. And that's true. And I think, and here's the thing, the more kind of disruptive and unsettling the world feels around us, the more those self-protective instincts to stay in our comfort zone and cling tightly to what is familiar kicks in. And so we actually call this the stuckness zone. There's a gap that's widening between that kind of innate, self-protective instinct we all have, and the more disruptive our world is getting. And because it's like, it triggers that. And so what we have to do is recognize, yes, this all feels unsettling. There's too much change in my organization. There's too much change in the world, whatever it is. And recognize that, you know what, in this season or this chapter of my life, I might have to do some transformation-based work to be able to lean in. And there's always going to be discomfort. It's how do you equip yourself and others with the tools and skills to get more comfortable to sit in the discomfort that inherently comes with transformation.
Would you say that that's one of the biggest challenges for leaders?
Oh, 100%, because they don't want to deal with the emotions that people have. They don't want to deal with discomfort. And here's the thing. If you look at the stats, like, so many leaders are personally burning out themselves because they are trying to manage themselves as a human being, and they're trying to manage a team that has all kinds of challenges and drama and whatnot. And a lot of them are not being equipped to do it, or they're just more and more is being piled on them, and they're not being given the tools to build the resiliency to go through that transformation. And it's hard. I mean, you start to see there's a lot of people that are just getting out of formal leadership altogether and saying, screw it. You look at some of the data, they talk about the middle manager. It's a crisis of middle management right now because they're struggling a lot because a lot just gets piled on them and they're getting it from both angles. So there's something very real to be said about formal leadership is not for the timid at all. And I think that we have to do a better job, and the data supports it, to develop and equip leaders to be effective in this environment, because it's not going to get any less disruptive or any less messy.
So for women looking to step into leadership roles or start their own business, actually, what are the most important lessons you have learned that you will pass on to them?
That's a great question. I would say, I think the biggest thing is you have got to be really, really clear about who you are as a person, your core. Like, have you done the work to get clear about your purpose and your values? We call that a lighthouse. And because that's what anchors you in the disruption, right? You like, okay, how do I want to show up here? And that also anchors you to go, what do I say yes to? What do I say no to? Whether it's starting my own business, whether it's a leadership role, you've got to know who you are so that you can find that alignment and be really clear and have a filter of what are the things that you say yes to and lean in. What are the things you say no to because they're not aligned? Because otherwise you try to do too much and either say yes to everything, or you end up chasing the squirrel and it's not aligned. And you see that a lot with, we even did this early on in our business, trying to be all things to all people versus find your niche, right? And be laser focused on what differentiates you, what types of clients you serve, who your ideal client avatar is. And I would say even in an organization, you're an intrapreneur, you're trying to get forward ideas, you're trying to move forward projects. It's a very similar thing. You've got to be laser focused on how does this align with the organization's purpose and values? How does this ladder up to strategic priorities? Like, you've got to have that very clear focus and alignment. And I think so often people don't do that foundational work, and then they flounder, they scramble. They just have hope is not a business strategy. Ideas are not a business strategy. You've got to, and you have to have the energy to keep going through it. So you've got to get super, super clear and kind of do that self-leadership so that you have that energy and that fire inside you to be able to move forward with clarity and alignment.
So what's next for you, Dr. Rosie? What's next for you and the company?
Yeah, so we just signed our publishing contract for our third book. So the working title right now is Future Proofing Leadership, but that's going to come out spring of 2026. So busy in writing and getting that out. We are just really trying to put our new research on these 7 faulty programs out into the world and level it up. We've just added another consultant on our team. So just really looking forward to continuing to have these conversations that I think are so timely, because I always just say in this world of increasing disruption, disconnection, and AI and technology, nothing can replace the human relationship building, interpersonal skills. And we probably need them now more than ever because there's just a lot of challenges. And so we're just doing everything we can to get that message out and do good work and hopefully equip others to show up as courageous leaders in all facets of their life and to have organizations be more human and be more effective.
And how can anyone reach out to you or the organization?
Yeah, so salveopartners.com, SALVEO partners.com. We also have a web LinkedIn page. You can follow me on LinkedIn, Rosie Ward. And then if you go to our website, all of the socials are there that you can click on. And there's also contact us forms where you can reach out to me. And then there's also a link to my Dr. Rosie Ward website, which has the podcast. So there's, if you go probably to salveopartners.com or find me, that's where all the socials are, or find me on LinkedIn. Be happy to connect, happy to chat.
You know, listening to you talking, you went through a lot to get to where you are today. So let's say if you wanted to go back in time, what would you change?
You know, what's so interesting is I've been asked versions of this question before. And I think on one hand, I want to say nothing, only because every bump, squiggle, detour of the journey has shaped where I am and who I am and where I'm, and it's all part of it, the good, bad, and ugly. Yeah. And I think to go back and say, none of us know what our journey looks like. And I think it's all played a role to where I am. So in that regard, I don't know that I would change anything specifically. I would love to say that I would go back and make peace with my 10-year-old self and have more self-compassion and more confidence and give myself more grace. But I also think that me being in the struggle along with so many other people makes me more relatable too. And I get it. So I think, I don't know. So if I could give myself more grace or have more confidence in an earlier part of my life, that would be lovely. But it's also all shaped, even the icky stuff we go through, we learn and grow from it.
And the funny part about it, they make us who we are.
Mm-hmm. Scars and all, right? There's no one else. I mean, there's no one else. Everyone else is taken, so you might as well be you, right?
Exactly. So it's all the scars, the one that you can see, no one else can see them, shape you. And you know how many times I ask people that question? No one ever answered it that way.
Oh, interesting. Well, there you go.
People always want to change something about themselves, but in reality, you don't need to. Mm-hmm. Because if you change anything in your past, then
you're not
you wouldn't be who you are anymore. You would have been a different person today.
Yeah. Right?
Yes.
100%. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Rosie, for giving me that chance to have this conversation with you, to get to know a little bit about you, especially when it comes to leadership. As women, we struggle with that a lot. And it's not because we're not good at it. It's because we don't have the support that we need. Mm-hmm. And having an organization like yours backing us up and then shaking things for us a little bit here and there, it's a great support that we can use every single day.
Well, thank you. This has been so delightful. I'm much appreciated.
Thank you for listening to Female Founders Podcast. That's it for this week's episode. Be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast app or connect with us on womel.com so that you don't miss our next episode. See you next time. Bye for now.